I have learned a little bit this week from the Kavanaugh hearings. I've learned that from Donald Trump Jr. that the people who are really scared after this week are not, the people who have to move back to North Carolina after the coal ash heaps have infected their rivers. Those aren't the ones who are really afraid now. Really, the people, according to the Trumps right now, who should be afraid are white males, especially white males, powerful males, who might be accused of sexual assault. And so I wanted to start tonight off, and I know I'm on Facebook Live, with some safety tips that I've learned in my past that used to be applied to other groups of people. But I think it would be really great for males who are afraid of being accused of sexual assault to hear. Number one, if you didn't want to be accused of sexual assault, why did you wear that outfit? Right? Be careful what you wear when you go to a party if you're worried about being accused of sexual assault, because you don't want to give off the impression that you might be promiscuous. So males, don't give off that impression. Okay, that's number one. Number two, if you know that people at that party are being accused of sexual assault, why are you going to that party in the first place? So maybe don't go to that party. And number three, be sure and always go with somebody else. Because, right, nobody's safe anymore, according to the Trumps. So that's my public safety message for free to all the fragile males out there. Whenever I speak, people often ask me how I make my notes and where I get my inspiration from. I always think, if people in this nation who are just as equal, humanly speaking, as I am, if those without a voice, those who are locked away or impoverished and living in the shadows of America, if they had a chance to get up and speak, what would they say? And so I try, every time I get up and speak, to embody and to give voice to what they would want to be said. Very recently, we experienced a hurricane, which turned pretty quickly into a tropical storm. And it made me think, actually, of flood stories that we have probably read about in your literature classes in the past. One of my favorites, of course, is the Babylonian flood story. You may or may not have read that one, but the Babylonian gods got upset and annoyed with the human beings because they were so loud, which makes the Babylonian gods pretty relatable, I think. But the other story, of course, that may be more popular in this area is the story from the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, the story of the flood. And what's interesting about flood stories is that they are ubiquitous. There is a flood story in almost every known culture that has ever been studied, that someone has ever done an ethnographic study of. These flood stories are so widespread, people often ask why. Why does every culture almost seem to have a flood story? For the Genesis story, it was a story of judgment. The deity in the Old Testament decided that humanity was wicked. And so that deity decided to save one family and to save the animals. But on the outside of the ark, there was an entire civilization of people that died. And I always wondered why in Sunday school, in churches, they don't ever do crafts about outside the boat. You ever notice the crafts that it's the animals, they're walking into the ark, it's before the scene, and then Noah and the animals are in the ark, but you never see Sunday schools do crafts for what happened outside the ark. But that's because we often, and we're even worse about this in America than other countries, we clean up our stories. We like to only look at the Disney version of these stories. But the flood story from Puerto Rico is quite relevant today. And the reason I think flood stories are so important is because when floods happen, or any natural disaster, society pauses. And the persistence of the normal, which so often covers up the injustices that we live with every day, ceases to persist. And people who are not used to being displaced, people who are not used to feeling in control of their destiny, suddenly join the lot of the homeless and the refugee. For a brief moment, the news notices suffering because tragedy reaches a high enough number to make it sensational. I wish that every time a person had to choose between life and livelihood, and because they couldn't go to the doctor, they lost a foot because of diabetes, I wish that would make the headline. But it's usually the floods and the hurricanes that make the headlines, the catastrophes that reach the other parts of America where we know that the American dream actually lives. So I talk to them about solutions to things that every single person needs. I avoid the tabloid politics. I do often go up to doors and they say, are you going to fight back against Trump? And I'm able to tell them yes. But most of the time, people are so busy trying to survive. I'm going to trailer parks. Lindsey Graham today said that Dr. Ford is what happens when you go through a trailer park waving a $100 bill. I grew up in a trailer, by the way, out in the country, and a lot of people in South Carolina grew up in a trailer. And so I'm really hoping somebody beats Lindsey Graham in 2020. But either way, I'm going out to the places where people have needs, and I'm trying to fight for justice. We pay a lot of money every year. We have the biggest prison population in the entire world. We have the most robust form of perverse socialism in the entire world. We're scared of the S word, usually, until it comes to someone carrying around an ounce of marijuana. By the way, this is one of the things I talk to people about. I have yet to meet anybody who's against medical marijuana. I've met a tiny number of people, a small number of people who are against recreational marijuana, which I'm for. But I talk to them about real issues, and I avoid tabloid politics because real issues are deep and sustainable. By the way, they told the Democrats long ago, before Social Security was a reality, it'll never happen. That's a communist dream. It's going to ruin capitalism if you pass Social Security. It became one of the rails of politics. Medicaid and Medicare were the same thing. It's going to be a communist nightmare. Reagan warned that once you start making sure the elderly get to be treated by a doctor, then the next thing you know, Stalin's going to be rounding up people at gulag, which ironically his party ended up creating a gulag in our country under ICE. So anyway, that's what I talk about, real issues. And so I thought somebody has to sign up and run against Doug Collins. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be someone who played footsies with centrism. Because I think that especially in a time like this, centrism is incredibly dangerous. I mean, what is the moderate position on Black Lives Matter? Do Black Lives Matter a little bit? Do some Black Lives matter? I don't understand how you can be a moderate about certain issues. So that's why I decided to run. I wanted to make sure that somebody was running who really was a bold voice. If Republicans can be bold about awful things, I think the Democratic Party can start experimenting with being bold about good things. Yes.
Hey, so you sound great. I'm signed up to volunteer. I was just wondering, what exactly did you mean when you said a perverse form of socialism?
Perverse form of socialism. So socialism is a pretty wide descriptive term.
Yeah.
And so you go all the way from sort of social democracy, FDR, who was probably quite a socialist in classical terms, to democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders, they still want to maintain capitalism, but they want to harness it to power a more robust social safety net, right? All the way over to Marxism and Bolshevik socialism. So all the historical possibilities that exist under that umbrella of socialism. So there is nothing more perversely socialist than telling someone, you have an ounce of marijuana. Now, I'm not going to send you to school for free. I'm not going to send you to the doctor on us, but I will put you in a cage. Sort of a perverse form of universal shelter, right? That's what's going to happen with the homeless bill in Gainesville. We don't want to pay for them a home, so we're going to put them in a very expensive home with guards and give them medical care. So it's not socialism, but it's a perverse form of socialism.
Yeah.
It's the reality that hides behind the mask of what they accuse others of. Everybody, all of us, Republican and Democrat, cancer does not know how you're registered or how you voted in the primaries. Heart disease, disabilities, none of these maladies are terribly selective. In fact, even people in the upper middle class, see, this is one of the most crucial problems in our country is the people in the middle class, since Reagan, have been really separated from their consciousness of what it's like to be working class and poor. It's been a very successful attempt over decades to turn middle class people against the poor and the working class. And in the 50s and 60s, they used to be pretty united around pretty strong social safety net. I believe that healthcare, achieving universal healthcare for every single American, could be an opportunity for us to talk about common values, about how, I don't care as a public servant whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, independent, non-voter, because you are a human, you are equal in value to me. And my whole platform is based on this guy who was definitely too extreme for Palestine way back in the day. I know he'd be too extreme according to Brian Kemp. I can't imagine that. Can you imagine the hit ads on Jesus of Nazareth? If he came out and preached like, blessed are the peacemakers. Peace. He's a pacifist. Too extreme for Georgia. Right? Blessed are the poor, cursed are the rich. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Anyway, I think that we could actually unite. I don't think it's too extreme to want to make sure to deliver health care to every single person in America. Yes?
One of the big issues, I did a little research on you, and I've been a big fan. You're a Bernie Sanders supporter.
That's right.
One of the big kind of cornerstones of this campaign was raising his money through small dollar donations.
Right.
Which kind of leads to the money issue. If you get in office and you had to think of a way to restructure a campaign finance system, I'm assuming you would like to do that.
Well, I can't wait to get my hands on that because I think that really the cap should be at $100. Most citizens can't give the max, which is $2,700. And even individual donors, which is the only kind of donations I've taken, I've refused any kind of PAC, special interest of any kind. In fact, I went and interviewed with the IBEW, with the unions, and I love unions. I want them to endorse me, and they did endorse me because I'm a big fan of unions. I would actually like for the workers to own a percentage of stock and to be rewarded, and then of course be paid a minimum when the stock goes down. But either way, the union said, so can we endorse you and can we give you some money? And I said, actually, I want your endorsement, but I really can't take your money because I want to run a campaign where I can say, my ideas are my own. Nobody paid me to think this way. And so I'm not condemning other candidates who take union money because I think that unions are all awesome. But, of course, ending citizenship, I have an idea which I think may be my only original idea. Most of the things I've got from FDR, MLK, and Jesus of Nazareth on the Sermon on the Mount. But I think one of my original ideas may be the PAC tax. It would be quick. It'd be something that Congress could pass. Congress has the constitutional right to tax. And so if we taxed all PACs at 75% and put that money towards radical things like health care and education, then we would neuter the, I'm using metaphors like that more lately now that Kavanaughs of the world are coming out. we would effectively neuter the power of PACs in this country. So long term, though, I think we should have federally funded elections because we're running for public office. We shouldn't have private funding for that. It's legalized bribery. If I get stopped by a police officer and I say, officer, I think what you're doing is wrong. Officer will write me a ticket. Officer, I think I should not be given a ticket for what I just did. He'll write me a ticket. I won't go to jail, right? But if I try to hand that officer money, I will then get arrested for bribery on top of my offense I just committed. Now, if I'm a corporation, then not only do I get to break the law, I get to actually write the law so that I will never get stopped. So I think that we've got to, it's a really obscene system. It's an eyesore, and it's one of the things that led to Trump's election. The whole the idea of by the way, I have a great idea of how to drain the swamp. Tax the swamp. It's the most obvious form of draining you can have. Betsy DeVos, I'll end on Betsy DeVos's fourth yacht.
Okay.
I would like to introduce a bill called Betsy DeVos's fourth yacht tax. It would be hard for them to rename that the death tax or the, you're hurting the children tax or whatever to save, Ivanka Trump another million or so when she inherits her unearned income, like a real welfare queen. What I would like to call it is Betsy DeVos's fourth yacht tax. The tale of Betsy DeVos's fourth yacht is quick. If you could set this in your mind to the tune of Gilligan's Island. No, that's anyway. The yacht, some vandal, which I do not approve of, even if I laugh at it, I don't approve of it. Somebody cut the cable on her fourth yacht, and it went floating off into a lake in Ohio. It was hard to find it though because it wasn't flying an American flag. The reason it wasn't flying an American flag was because it was registered in the Cayman Islands, so that it wouldn't be taxed. You see, Betsy DeVos's fourth yacht is untaxed. And even though it's a Cayman yacht, it's floating right here in Ohio. I would like to find some more of those runaway yachts and ostrich skin jackets. And I would like to, instead of allowing, I'm running out of people who've been arrested connected to Trump. What's his name again? Campaign manager, Manafort. We can save Manafort some of his embarrassment at buying an ostrich skin jacket by taxing him and funding health care instead. So, that's what I would do for campaign finance reform and for taxation. Anyway, I'll let you guys go.